The one thing we know about this generation that's getting out of college right now is they are very, very civically motivated. And I think that matches up entirely with the DNA of local broadcasting. That having been said, I also think our industry needs to do a better job of taking what we do best, which is local, and innovating it in a way that we are connecting with audiences in a variety of different ways, which is not the way that we've been doing business for the last 30 years. And some local stations are doing it better than others. But the quicker that we can be in a place, because we've got the right content, we've got the right people, we've got the right message, we've got the right process, but we've got to have the right end product for the consumer and where they are right now. And we are very, very quickly innovating and getting there. But the quicker we can get to that place, I think what we are, the DNA of what we are, maps really well onto this next generation, whether you want to be behind a microphone or in production or an engineer or a salesperson. Do it in an industry that's making a difference in the communities that we serve.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My next guest is a key figure in the broadcasting industry. In his role, he serves as the chief advocate for America's free local television and radio stations, along with their network partners. He leads the charge for policies and innovations that ensure the availability of high-quality local broadcast programming to everyone across the country. He and his team work tirelessly to level the playing field between local stations and big tech companies, prevent harmful new regulations that could hinder broadcasters' ability to serve their communities, and promote the vital and trusted local journalism that broadcasters provide. In recognition of his leadership, he was named Radio Inc.'s Executive of the Year. Please welcome Curtis LeGeyt, the President and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters. Thank you so much, man.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm in awe right now. I got to see you speak at the NAB a couple months ago, and I am just absolutely blown away at what a great orator you are. You're just a really, really well-spoken human being. Tell me a little bit about growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Connecticut. I actually was born, and certainly as someone who right now goes up to Capitol Hill and talks to members of Congress from all over the country, I say I'm from the Midwest when it suits me because I was actually born in Ohio. But the reality is I never actually lived in Ohio. I was in the hospital as an infant for a couple of months because I had a fairly bad lung infection. And in the interim, my parents moved to Indiana. So I got out of the hospital, went to Indiana, was there until I was 2.5, but then spent my childhood right outside of Hartford, Connecticut. So I was there growing up through high school.
And it sounds like you were a very studious, or at least a very bright student. You got your BA at Providence College in quantitative economics, and then your JD from Cornell University Law School, both incredible schools. I actually have, Cornell is my alma mater, not the school, but I grew up on a Cornell street. My home address, my parents would have been much more proud if I went to Cornell, but at least I lived on Cornell. What did you want? Were you interested in broadcasting when you were younger?
I was always a good student, but I would say growing up, my priorities were elsewhere. And really what I mean is I grew up in a suburban town in Connecticut. And like a lot of people, it probably took longer than it should have to realize I wasn't going to be an NBA player. But I was very passionate about sports growing up. And then once I got into high school, I started to get my act together and just get a little bit more serious. And immediately was drawn to politics, in fact, and journalism. And so, I wrote for my school newspaper in high school. I was always very, very much a connective person, meaning I loved being in the center of whatever discussions were going on, whether that was amongst my friends, whether it was amongst teachers, whether it was in my family, and trying to find a middle ground. And I was just flipping back at my high school yearbook, and all over that, it was sort of this passion to get into journalism. But I always had these, once I got old enough to start to have a view for where I might want to go, it was always knowing I was passionate about the news and the importance of news, sometimes in sports, which I loved from the time I was a kid. But beyond that, into world affairs. And then I became passionate about politics and just the ability to sit down and solve everyday problems. I don't know that I was particularly drawn to, national politics, but just the idea of service. And so when I think about those two dual interests, and it was really the second one that then drove me to go to law school and ultimately get to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill, I think it's all come full circle because this job at the National Association of Broadcasters has really wed my passion for journalism and the work being done every day in communities, sleeves rolled up to hold government and big business to account, what our stations are doing across the country, wed with a passion for politics because I get the opportunity to go up to Capitol Hill and make the case for broadcast up there and still work adjacent to it. So that's really where it comes from. But I don't have one of those stories where you can say very linearly, I knew I wanted to be a journalist, so I went and did these 5 things and ultimately became an ambassador for this industry, or I knew I wanted to work in high-level politics. I worked for President Obama's campaign in 2008 and ultimately was a lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee. None of those were linear paths, but I do think this role at NAB has really wed all of my passions.
Out of school, you get hired by Putnam and Associates. And is that like Boston Consulting, McKinsey, similar?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think at the time, some of my friends were puzzled why I was interested in getting into management consulting because, like I said, I was an economics major, so I clearly had some sort of aptitude for business. But I don't think anyone ever looked at me and said that element of all of this is what he's most passionate about. But I think for me, I wanted to be in a place from the go where I had the opportunity to solve problems. So Putnam was a place when I went to interview there, and they were doing a lot of recruitment for kids right out of college, where I knew that I could step in and get some real intensive experience and learn the business world quickly under the tutelage of some smart people. Wouldn't say I was passionate about it, but I liked the opportunity to be discussing high-level problems of what was going on with our clients and helping to map out some solutions for them, but very quickly knew that I wanted to be solving problems that were a little bit more attached to what was going on in our political and civic discourse, which is what drew me to law school.
And after Putnam, or maybe it was congruent, you worked for the Obama campaign. What did you do for the Obama campaign? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was on the Obama train very early. I had the opportunity to see him speak when he was still at the state level. And then when he came to Washington, D.C. as a senator, I was in Washington, D.C., really beginning my legal career here, doing a lot of legal work alongside the Democratic political committees and then ultimately the Judiciary Committee, and was just so drawn to him as someone who represented the very best of our politics. And in my view at the time, and maybe it was a naive view, I thought really transcended the partisanship that I was so tired of in the moment. Now, when we compare, the world of the early 2000s to where we are today, that doesn't even look like partisanship. Sure. But at the time, I really felt like he was someone who leaned into the idea that, these tough policy issues, they all have nuance. So I was very much drawn to him and got involved with his campaign in 2007 when he was very much an underdog, ultimately went to work for him full time. And I was a lawyer for the campaign. So what does that mean? In the early states, I was jumping from, New Hampshire to South Carolina to Indiana to Montana, helping to prop up these small operations and ensure that the campaign had the rules of the road in place of what are we doing to maximize our potential for getting delegates in the state? How are we turning out our voters? How are we ensuring that every voter who wants to vote understands what they need to do to legally cast a ballot, to push back on any kind of voter intimidation? That then extended into the general election. But really, it was just playing whack-a-mole and creating an environment from a legal perspective where we could ensure that anyone who wanted to vote for then Senator Obama had the opportunity and ability to do it if they were legally able to do it. That sounds a lot easier than at times it is in practice, but we had a significant legal team that we built out that I was really in from the early stages that helped to ensure we could do that across the country. And obviously, he won fairly decisively in 2008.
So I find all this so incredibly fascinating, and obviously in the middle of an election year, in a very fascinating and in much talked about election year. How many people are part of a presidential election like that? How big of a machine is it?
Well, now it's become even bigger, I would say, right? You've got a few different things happening, but I think it is fair to say that if you're just talking about the team that works for the core presidential campaign, meaning not the state parties, not the Democratic or Republican national committees, et cetera, you're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 full-time staffers. And then layer on top of that, all of those party committees, which are coordinated at both a federal and a state level in a certain sense, but have a broader mandate up and down the ballot in particular states. You've got a lot of people working on these elections, and it's more people by the cycle. You're obviously, it seems, and I wrote down just, you have a sense of higher purpose, and I find that incredibly admirable. I have a friend who works at PwC and another one at Boston, and I know those can be incredibly lucrative careers. And so I'm guessing that was a step back for you kind of financially. I'm assuming, was that a hard decision for you? Well, we're missing a slight half step here, which is I knew that the time that I spent at Putnam was going to be short-lived because I had made the decision very soon into my time there that I wanted to go to law school. I was applying to law schools and then ultimately went full-time to law school. I had a couple of years in between undergrad and law school. When I graduated from law school, I went to work for a large law firm. The name of the firm was Howery. At the time, it was a sizable DC law firm. We had, close to 1,000 lawyers, and it got hit hard in the 2008 financial crisis and dissolved after I was there. But it's a long way of saying, when I got out of law school, I knew I wanted into DC. I wanted to be in DC, but I also had some student debt to repay. So I tried to do two things at once. I went to work for a big law firm where I was able to gain some really substantive experience in the areas that ultimately really helped me in the places that I did work on Capitol Hill and now at the NAB. I mean, I was very, very involved in intellectual property issues and antitrust issues. And so I got that legal training in litigation and merger reviews while I was able on the side to further work in the area I was passionate about, which was close to politics. I did a lot of legal work with the Democratic campaigns here in Washington, D.C. And it was that pivot when I decided, no, I really want to go and do this full time. That certainly there was a financial sacrifice involved in that at the time. I was fortunate to have the ability to absorb that a bit. But I had great mentors at the time who really said to me, listen, this is a time in life where you can make sacrifices. You don't have a family. You don't have kids. At the end of the day, if you can make it work, go get the best experiences that present themselves to you. You want to be in and around politics, go do it, and then figure out the rest later. And that's really been my North Star. I spend a lot of time having coffee with, these students who are trying to figure out, they're right out of undergrad. They're trying to figure out how to get their foot in the door in Washington, D.C., whether to do some of these jobs that can be a bit of a grind from an administrative and lifestyle perspective on Capitol Hill. And they're always asking me the questions of, hey, should I go put in my time doing this? Because I think the only way that I can go and get the job as a staffer on a committee is if I go do these two things first, or should I work on a campaign because maybe that will get me in a door in a different direction? And the advice I always give is this: don't ever take a job that you don't think you'll be fulfilled by simply from the job itself. And that doesn't mean that the actual work needs to be something you're necessarily inspired by, but the purpose hopefully is something you're inspired by if you have the luxury to do that. And I recognize not everyone does, but if you do, you can't measure a job by what you hope the next job will be, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And so that has guided me, which is to say, hey, listen, I'm not sure where this next job is going to take me, but it sounds like a really good opportunity. I'm going to work really, really hard. It's got a bit of a higher purpose. That to me is personally important. And that has always set me up to be recognized and give me the opportunity for the next thing.
It's a sensational piece of advice. Thank you for sharing that. After the Obama campaign and President Obama gets elected, you then go to work as senior counsel for the Senate Judiciary Chairman, Patrick Leahy. Is that correct?
Leahy, yes, correct. Long tenured senator from Vermont.
How did that happen? Did he see your success with being involved with Obama's campaign?
Yeah, so I had been involved with some of his lawyers on the committee prior to the Obama campaign as well, and had done some work alongside the committee during some of the Supreme Court nomination processes during the Bush administration, and then had the opportunity working alongside some of those same lawyers on the legal team for the Obama campaign, and then ultimately went to work there. My focus, the Senate Judiciary Committee is most known for its role in confirming Supreme Court justices. And I had a great opportunity to really be on the front lines for the committee's considerations of now sitting justices Sotomayor and Kagan. But my day job alongside of that was really to run point in the committee's agenda on antitrust, copyright, and First Amendment issues. And so that was really from a substance perspective when I got my first taste of everything that was going on in the broadcast industry. I mean, growing up in New England, those local television and radio stations were just part of the fabric of the town where I was raised. But getting a front row seat to everything that broadcasters were dealing with at the time, and from a legal perspective, the fact that just to be in the business of broadcasting, you've got to go to the FCC and get a license before you can even flip on the lights. And that the government and the laws that Congress has created are really the underpinnings of this industry that ensure that you've got this locally focused construct rather than what exists everywhere else in media, which is these national umbrellas. I was fascinated by that. And I've never been one for very heavy-handed government, but it is just so obvious to me that broadcasters on one hand could only exist because Congress enabled individual competition within 200 plus different media markets across the country to ensure there was a medium focused principally on communities rather than just national issues. But second, as the world was evolving, how much the competition with national players, and I've seen it even more so since I've been at NAB as Facebook, Google, et cetera, have entered the fray, how that was also interfering with that ability to deliver locally. So I was fascinated by the industry and very much drawn to it. And when an opportunity presented itself to come and to represent the broadcast industry's interests up on Capitol Hill, I took advantage of that.
And in 2015, you were hired as the Executive Vice President of Government Relations. And what did that role entail for the NAB?
NAB, from an advocacy perspective, does something, I'm lucky to have been a part of it, that I think is unique amongst industries in that, you got a lot of business interests who come to Washington and tell you about their businesses. And they tend to lean on the handful of places where the particular businesses are headquartered and those members of Congress to support their interests. Broadcast is unique because we have a physical presence as an industry in every congressional district in the country. And so what I would joke in that role as executive vice president heading our government relations effort was, yes, we had to have the best policy arguments on Capitol Hill, and substantively, I was prepared for that, and I managed a great team and continue to lead a great team that brings those best policy arguments to policymakers. But really, that job is an air traffic control job, which is to say, we're going to make sure that we're marshaling the resources of, yes, we've got the best boots on the ground lobbyists, but how do we sync that up with local stations across the country, the meetings that they're having with their members of Congress, ensuring that we're all singing from the same song sheet? How do we then ensure that we are amplifying the collective message with a great public affairs team here in DC, focused on the right members of Congress? How does our political action committee, which employees across the industry donate to, allow us to then say thank you financially to the campaigns of the members of Congress who support you? That role as head of government relations, as much as it's the one making the arguments on Capitol Hill, it's also ensuring that all of those things work in sync with one another towards a common goal. And so I loved that job.
I think you are built for that job, man. You are so, again, I mentioned this to me, you're so well spoken. Where did that confidence come from? Did your parents instill from you? And I mean this in a really good way, that you are on Capitol Hill and you're talking to senators at the highest level and you're working with President Obama. And, to this day, you're bringing Ted Cruz and Ed Markey together on the AM Act, AM Radio for Every Vehicle. How do you make that happen? I mean, that is not easy.
I think like a lot of things, I appreciate the compliment, but I take it with some degree of humility. I'm a big believer that confidence comes from over preparation. I'm not someone who walks into a meeting and wings it. I'm not someone who goes into a meeting with, one of my colleagues here at NAB, not sure what I want to talk about. And so I'm a big believer that it takes a lot of work to seem relaxed. And that's something that both of my parents, they were divorced, but each had very, very strong work ethics. My mother was a veterinarian, ran her own veterinary practice. My father still, although I wish he would retire at some point, he still runs his own financial services company that has become tremendously successful. He never graduated college, really worked from the ground up, and you learn a lot of things from your parents. They in different ways about, work-life balance and how to prioritize family while also showing, seriousness when it comes to both career and being a kind person and friend to the people around you. Both of them embodied that in different ways. But I think the biggest thing I saw from them was just the work that happened behind the scenes. It can take work to make something seem easy. So I take your compliment when it comes to confidence. I only gain confidence if I feel I'm prepared for every possible question that can come my way. And so sometimes I do it better than others. I'm very fortunate here at NAB to be surrounded by an incredible team that can help ensure that I'm prepped for those meetings up on Capitol Hill. I'm prepped for those meetings with my staff. I'm prepped for those meetings with my own member companies, each of which is facing its own dynamics, unique competitive challenges. I'm not going to walk into a conversation with one of my member companies without having some sense of what is top of mind for them in that moment. And that doesn't come without a lot of work from our team here at NAB. And they work overtime to ensure I'm prepared and to try to match my sense of urgency around that.
The Library of American Broadcasting Foundation presents the Giants of Broadcasting and Electronic Arts Luncheon.
Join us on November 12th at Gotham Hall in New York City. This prestigious event will be emceed by Bill Whitaker of 60 Minutes and CBS News.
Honoring the 2024 LABF Giants of Broadcasting and Electronic Arts, Al Roker, Christine Baranski, Mike McVeigh, Patsy Smolin, Stephen A. Smith, Steve Jones, and Wendy McMahon.
Plus, Hearst Television receives the LABF Excellence in Broadcasting Preservation Award.
Proceeds benefit the preservation and expansion of the Library of American Broadcasting and the education initiatives of the Broadcast Education Association.
For event sponsorship and ticket information, visit tvradiolibrary.org. Be a part of preserving the past, reflecting the present, and informing the future. tvradiolibrary.org.
On a quiet day, you're probably taking a call from Bob Pittman. And on a busy day, you've got Senator Cruz on the line, or you're going to do a Senate committee hearing. And you said your team comes in and helps you prep. But when you go and you're on a Senate committee hearing, that seems so intimidating to me. I've seen that on CNBC, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I could only imagine the stress that has to be for the person that's testifying.
Well, that's where I think it really benefits that I've been on the other side of this. And obviously not as a member of Congress, but I have prepped committee members for the types of hearings that I now testify at. And the thing that I always say to all of our witnesses, and I've prepped a lot of witnesses here at NAB to testify on behalf of the broadcast industry to go up there. And the thing that I always remind them, because I don't want someone to get in the room and be shell-shocked, this is a lot more important from a preparation perspective to the witness who's testifying than it is to the members of Congress. The members of Congress are jumping between multiple hearings. For the most part, they are not listening to what you have to say. They come in with a specific agenda to get a couple of talking points across, maybe ask a question. Some of them more skillfully do it in a way that makes it seem that they are solicitous of your point of view. But by and large, they are in there to accomplish a certain objective, and the witness is a pawn in that objective. So that can be something that really puts you at ease, because what it says to you is, actually, what I say means a lot less to them than it does to me. And what I've got to be mindful of is, have I put myself in a position where the members of Congress are there to help me advance my interests? So yes, I'm very focused when I'm there on what I'm going to say in response to a question. Truth told, the win is when I got a question that is prefaced in a really favorable way to the broadcast-centric issue that I'm testifying on, and that Senator Markey or Senator Cruz in their preface expressed a point of view that's really favorable to us, and then I'm just filling in some gaps here. And the members of Congress are up, they're on their phones, they're distracted, there's a lot of distractions going on, so it can put you at ease. But no doubt, the element of it that I take most seriously, and the reason that I do over-prepare, is because that's my reality, knowing that for the members of Congress, they've got their own agendas up there. But I also know I've got an entire industry of people behind me who are going to be parsing the words that come out of my mouth and who I need to represent with a lot of pride. And that they're fulfilling a service in markets around the country that no one else is doing. And this is my opportunity to tell their story and to put some wind in their sails, that not only am I speaking on their behalf in a way they can be really proud of, but we've championed a whole bunch of members of Congress to sing from that same song sheet.
Thank you so much for explaining that to me, because I had no idea how that worked. I just see it on television, and I thought they were there the entire time grilling you. I didn't know that they were going from, one meeting to the next. And
it's interesting. One thing when we are prepping witnesses that we always need to remind them is, don't feel afraid to make the same point 5 or 6 times for the reason that you just described, which is that you may seem like you're repeating yourself, but you're not, because most of these members of Congress are in and out. And even when they're in, they're paying attention to a few different things. I mean, they have very demanding jobs, right? The spectrum of issues that a member of Congress is dealing with on any given day is significant. And we've got to be cognizant that our issue in the solar system of Washington, D.C. policymaking is a distant star. So there's nothing wrong with repeating your best point 7 or 8 times and hoping that each member of that dais hears it once. And if they do, you've won. But if you immediately, because you don't want to be repetitive, get to your 3rd or 4th best point pretty quickly, well, they might only hear your 3rd or 4th best point, and then you didn't put your best foot forward.
Makes complete sense. And thank you for that explanation. In 2022, you are named the president and CEO of the NAB. And I think it's important to point out, you're young, man. You are really taking this industry and this organization by storm. What did that feel like, getting that gig? And you had very big shoes to fill as well.
Well, 2 things. My predecessor, Gordon Smith, I think did so much to elevate this association and industry in the Washington, D.C. conversation. And he was someone, and I was fortunate to be able to serve at his side for several years and to see the way that he thought about problem solving and really the arc of policymaking in Washington, D.C., and really how far in advance you need to plan, the ingredients to get the politics on your side on a particular issue, how to galvanize diverse groups of stakeholders. He did a lot to really elevate this industry. So my goal off the bat was twofold. One, it was to carry that momentum forward, but recognizing that this industry is in a very different place than when Senator Smith took over the NAB in 2009. And I think he was very much the right fit for a certain set of challenges that took place over his tenure. And I'm a different fit for a new and unique set of challenges that the industry is facing, both radio and television today. And so I really wanted to carry that momentum forward, but also not expect that just trying to replicate the same playbook that had worked, for the last 10 years was going to work for the next 10 years. And that brings me to the second point, which is this. Those were big shoes to fill, and there was no way to fill them. So I got some great advice right off the bat, which was to demonstrate and be very outward with my own leadership style. Gordon is someone who could stand up and command a room for 90 minutes straight. I don't think he ever saw a microphone and a podium that he didn't want to filibuster. He'd be the first one to make that joke. I'm someone who I think creates a lot more energy and engagement through one-on-one conversations and by really connecting with people on an individual level more so than trying to command a room. And it's not to say that in this role, heading a large trade association, that you don't have those responsibilities to get up in front of a room. And I appreciated your kind words of how I can perform in those settings with a lot of preparation. But I very quickly said to our team, listen, let's maximize the opportunities for me to do what I do best, which is to demonstrate a deep understanding of both this industry, the challenges that we're facing, and the machinery up on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C. to help address these problems. Gordon was a front-facing U.S. Senator. I was a behind-the-scenes, make it all work and put the pieces together staffer. And so that's a different skill set, but it's a skill set that I think is necessary in a climate right now where it is very, very tricky to try to get things over the finish line here in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of pieces to it, and I think that actually works to my background and experience. And we have brought a team on in place here that it really can operate from a sophistication perspective at the highest level in helping the industry execute. So that's really how I looked at this. I want to take all the things we're doing well and not screw it up, but also recognize that we've got unique challenges and we probably need to fine tune some things. And I continue to rely on Gordon's advice in that regard, but we need to fine tune some things to meet the moment.
Well, you're obviously...
people have also asked me the question, and you alluded to this, given my age of, how did that feel? Those types of questions. And the reality here is I think I'll be able to answer that question a lot more once I see what we accomplish. This title doesn't mean a whole lot of president and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters, unless you're the president and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters who managed to do something sizable in enabling local broadcasters to better combat misinformation, something sizable when it comes to ensuring that radio is going to remain accessible in the automobile, something sizable when it comes to confronting generative AI and the risks that it poses for our trusted personalities, for our ability to be fairly compensated for our content. These are huge challenges that we're confronting as an industry right now. And I'm laser focused on what's the game plan that we're executing to get a favorable policy environment here in Washington, D.C. to allow broadcasters to survive and thrive in this landscape more so than what the title is.
From my perspective, and I think the industries as a whole, you are off to a phenomenal start. You just got a contract extension through 2029. Congratulations. And you got Senator Markey and Senator Cruz to meet in the middle and put forth the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act, which I can't believe, at least it looks like things are so polarized right now in Washington. And how were you able to have those conversations with both, a staunch Republican and staunch Democrat and get them to collectively putting a bill forth? Is that what it's called?
To get they introduced the bill.
Thank you. Okay,
exactly.
To introduce the bill.
You can use the terminology is all very interchangeable.
Okay,
so you'd fit right in over here.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Now, look, here's the great thing about the broadcast industry, the industry that you and I collectively represent from different vantage points, is that it doesn't wear a particular political stripe. And so we were able to see in Senator Markey and Senator Cruz, and by the way, they are not alone in their parties. There is a long list of Democrats and Republicans who want to find ways to help local broadcasters. This happened to be an issue where we knew that there was tremendous interest for different reasons on both their parts to do something significant as it related to AM radio's place in the automobile. The difficulty can be trying to get each of them entrenched enough in that issue before the politics around working with the other interferes with their interest in the issue. And I just think, for the most part, these are legislators, and I know that this isn't what shows up on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but these are legislators that want to find some bipartisan issues to work on. You know, they are going to have their partisan squabbles. I'm not sure there's another issue, frankly, that Ted Cruz and Ed Markey agree upon, which is why when we were able to say to each of them, hey, you know who else wants to lead on this? The other guy. It was intriguing for them. We did that work. We identified it, and they've been a great tandem. And we've really worked both on the Senate and the House bill to keep these bills evenly bipartisan. So we're now at a point where the Senate bill has 62 co-sponsors, almost evenly bipartisan. And the range of co-sponsors, you know, we're talking about Senators Markey and Cruz, but Bernie Sanders is a co-sponsor. On the House bill, Speaker Mike Johnson is a co-sponsor. And you've got some pretty big swings here in the ideological spectrum. And these members, for the most part, want an issue where they can lay their kind of partisan gripes off to the side and show that when it makes sense, bipartisanship is possible in Washington, D.C. Every one of them wants to be able to say that in their stump speech and show that they can move legislation. So we're in a really positive place on this. We got 250 co-sponsors on the House bill. I expect that that bill will get more House process here shortly. And we've just got to be teed up for when the opportunity presents itself to get this bill over the finish line. And I would say that's the place where trying to do this in an election year is really difficult, because there's not going to be a whole lot of significant pieces of legislation passed by both in the House and the Senate before this election. In fact, there may be none. So the question here is, even if you've got all the right politics on your side, which I think we do, how do you ensure that in that moment where there's some agreement on some expiring provisions, whatever it may be, that Congress needs to pass a large package before the end of the year, how do we ensure that our bill is ripe to be included in whatever that looks like? And I think we're doing everything we can to get there.
From our little perspective of the network side of the business, I am so grateful that you are leading that charge for us. And it's an industry I love wholeheartedly, and it means a lot. It's like having, I liken you, you are our Churchill, or, you know, leading this little island nation. So thank you for all your hard work. You are obviously have your hands full running the NAB, but I also want to point out just all the great board work that you do. You're on the board of Providence College. You're part of the NAB Leadership Foundation Board, the Broadcasters Foundation of America, the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and Tracy's Kids, which is a non-for-profit helping kids with cancer. They're all very important, but speak to one of those and the importance of the board work that you do.
I'm going to speak to the Broadcasters Foundation because as I travel the country getting to know local broadcasters, all market sizes, all group sizes, you realize that by and large, these are not 9-to-5 jobs. They are people who are really putting themselves out there on behalf of the industry. And oftentimes the people working in our industry have families who really rely on their work. So the mission of the Broadcasters Foundation is to ensure that if a person in the industry falls upon hard times, that there's a safety net there to help them and their families in the most tragic of circumstances. And I think the expansion of this organization over the past several years has been nothing short of extraordinary. It's doing really important work for those who are less fortunate within our broadcast family. And I'm really proud to be part of that board.
It's a great team. I've had both Scott and Tim McCarthy on, and both wonderful human beings, and you guys do
absolutely
phenomenal work. Do you ever pinch yourself when you're walking through the Capitol building and you're meeting with senators like Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz? I mean, they're big celebrities, not only incredibly powerful, but do you think back going, oh my gosh, growing up in Connecticut and now now I'm on Capitol Hill with the most powerful people in the world?
Yeah, I think, Washington, D.C., I never want to take it for granted. There's a lot about the political toxicity in this town that I don't love right now, but I will never get tired of walking next to the Capitol at night. Sun's going down and you've got the sunset, gleaming off of the dome. I never want to get tired of that. The smell of the Capitol building and the House and Senate buildings around the holidays. It's a really, really unique place. And Washington, D.C., and I know there's some cynicism around the country about Washington, D.C., but it's a unique place because there's a lot of people who come here intent on making a difference. And I really think that transcends all of the partisanship, that there's a group here of really committed people, both sides of the aisle, and it can be inspiring when you see the very best of it. And so that's something that I do sometimes need to pinch myself, not necessarily, and not to diminish the point that you made. I mean, there's some big names up there, and I've got a privilege to represent the broadcast industry and to go meet with them. And certainly that is the case when you walk into the White House, that those can be a pinch yourself moment as well. But I think for me, it's more I don't want to take it for granted. If this ever becomes just a job, it's probably time to find a different one. Last question.
Advice. I know you work with a lot of young people in the BEA, and thank you for that. What is your advice for young people that are interested in getting into broadcasting, but have some concerns about the future and where the industry is going?
Look, I think we need to do a better job as an industry, really reminding young people of the cause. As a country, as a democracy, our media is overtaken right now with online disinformation, with a lot of politicized news outlets. There's a role for those, but broadcast in particular is filling a void. It's now been largely vacated by the newspapers of trusted, community-focused information, and we've got to double down on it, because I do think with some of these just really polarized issues, local broadcasters have the standing, because these are trusted individuals in the communities they serve, to talk about some otherwise really difficult and divisive issues in a way that has credibility on all sides. And we need to sell that to young people. The one thing we know about this generation that's getting out of college right now is they are very, very civically motivated. And I think that matches up entirely with the DNA of local broadcasting. That having been said, I also think our industry needs to do a better job of taking what we do best, which is local, and innovating it in a way that we are connecting with audiences in a variety of different ways, which is not the way that we've been doing business for the last 30 years. And some local stations are doing it better than others, but the quicker that we can be in a place, because we've got the right content, we've got the right people, we've got the right message, we've got the right process, but we've got to have the right end product for the consumer and where they are right now. And we are very, very quickly innovating and getting there. But the quicker we can get to that place, I think what we are, the DNA of what we are, maps really well onto this next generation. Whether you want to be behind a microphone or in production or an engineer or a salesperson, do it in an industry that's making a difference in the communities that we serve.
I'm pinching myself that you did this with me today. So grateful for it. Thank you for your time, for your stewardship, and for helping our industry and navigating what sometimes can be very treacherous waters. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the Benztown team, and I think to everybody that listens to this podcast as well. You're a good man.
You bet. I'm really happy to do it. Thank you for the time today, and thank you for everything you all are doing.
Also, Curtis, I want to thank your team, April, Alex, and everyone that helped put this together. You've got a phenomenal team over there, and so please thank them on my behalf for all their support.
Will do. Absolutely. And anything I can do for you guys, just let me know.
Thank you, man. Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends.
Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Executive producer, Darren Silva. Producer and editor, Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator, Estefania Padilla. Marketing and distribution, Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.